What's up, y'all? It is Kimmy Coco, and I am your host for Innovative Black Stations Connecting the Dots. Caleb is not here right now because he's in Cuba, so I can't wait to see him come back with all our goodies because we asked for cigars and everything, okay? And pictures and everything. I just can't wait to hear his story. But in the meantime, we have a special guest, Mr. Harrison Blackmond. And he is special because he is the grandfather of our executive producer. So we are going to get all the info and all the insight and all the wisdom and all the knowledge that he has for us today. And it is always a blessing when you have the pleasure to sit down with someone that has been through all that he has been through. And I just can't wait to hear his story. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's a pleasure.
And we were reading about you. We were talking. Jay Black talks about you, and he said he didn't even know some of the things that I was reading, and I was like, "What? Like you have this just knowledgeable grandfather and just all this experience, and you didn't know?" But just like we were talking about before, even with my parents and my grandparents, we just don't tap into some of that wisdom of our elders, and we really, really, really should. So I look forward to, you sharing with our audience some of the things that you have been through. And I know that education is your passion because we just were talking about that. But let people know how growing up in the South and everything influenced you to move on and lean toward an education. And just tell everybody about anything you want to tell them about. It's your show today.
Okay. Thank you, Kim. It's such a pleasure being here. And I am so proud of my grandson and what he's doing. It's very important to get people talking about important issues as it relates to the Black community. And, especially given how I started, I was the ninth of 12 children. Born on a sharecropper's farm in Alabama. It was back in the woods, no electricity, no running water, no inside bathrooms or anything like that. And the sharecropper's life was a pretty tough life. It was, as I describe it, a step up from slavery.
Right. So after Reconstruction or not, depending on how you look at it, what happened was once the slaves were free, then most people still stuck to the line of work of farming or whatever they were doing, but now they were legally had to be paid, but they weren't paid much, and they really didn't have anywhere to go once they were free, so they kind of like stuck around and just kept doing what they were doing, but were given scraps basically. My family is from Wilkes County, Georgia, which is about 2 hours away from here, but for generations, and I mean up until my father, we went there once, and he showed me how he still, to tend to the fields and cut down trees, and so.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It was after slavery. You're right. The only skills Black people had was working on a farm.
Yeah.
For the most part, there were a few who were blacksmiths and had a few other skills, but they were in the minority. The overwhelming majority of Black people, all they knew how to do was farm, plow mules, pick cotton, chop peanuts, stack peanuts, and that kind of thing.
Right.
And that's what we did.
Right.
And the larger the family a sharecropper had, the better his chances of making a little money.
Yeah.
At the end of the harvest, my father would sit down with the landowner, and the landowner would let him know how much the seeds and the use of the mules and the plows cost.
Wow.
And then how much the crop made, and my father would get a share. But that was always determined by the landowner. So if you were fortunate and had a landowner that was fair, then you got a fair return. One of my uncles told me a story not long ago about how he kept track of everything that was spent. He kept track of everything that he made. He had a book with everything in it. And when he went to sit down with the landowner, he put his book on the table, and the landowner reached over and pushed the book aside and said, "You don't need that. I know exactly everything.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you how much you made or how much you spent and that kind of thing."
Right.
And of course, he shortchanged my uncle. But my uncle was kind of a militant at the time, and he says he didn't say anything. He went back to the house and loaded up the mule and the wagons with all they could load up, and then in the middle of the night, he took off with everything that he could salvage.
Wow.
It was the last time he worked on the farm, but that was the life, and that was the life I was gonna lead.
And I would lead if it had not been. I mean, and we're not talking about so long ago. And this is what I really want people our age to understand. My father did that. You know what I mean? It's not like we think, oh, this off far away land. Remember the show Little House on the Prairie? No, this is like 50 years ago.
Right.
And the fact that, you know, your livelihood and my family's livelihood and many other families' livelihood kind of depended on the morality of their owner of the property that they worked on.
Precisely.
It leads all the way up till now, which the new presidential election about descendants of slaves getting reparations. But we can talk about that later. So continue on about how, you know, just having gone through that, how you realize, and I was reading one of the articles that you'd written before, that the education was kind of the key.
Exactly.
For you to get out of that line, because like you said, you would have done that too.
Precisely, and I was very fortunate in some ways because my older brothers and sisters didn't really have the same opportunity I had, even though at the time it was going to be a limited opportunity. Most black boys didn't even go to school. They just worked on the farm. But at least I was able to go to school first, second, third, fourth grade down there. Actually, first and second down there. And the expectation was that when I reached 12 years old, I was going to have to drop out of school.
Right, and just work on the farm.
And just work on the farm.
And that's just what people did. It wasn't expected for you to graduate from high school. There's no like, oh, he's going to go to college. The hope that you had in the future of your legacy stopped there.
Exactly.
And that's what I still, like I said, reading your story, it was just like the stories that my father told me. And just like Jay Black told me, Jabari told me he did not know a lot of stuff. And I didn't either. You know when I found out my father's story? Last Father's Day.
Yeah.
When I met him in his hometown and he just started, you know, remembering, oh man, I used to walk down this street and, you know, this wouldn't be here had it not been for us. My family cut these yards so that these fields could, and I was like, what? And then he told me how far, and you too in your article said how far you had to walk to get to school. I mean, forget about the fact that you know, the education, you hardly ever got any, but if you did want, it was that hope and that, I mean, how much did you have to want to learn in order for you to get up every day and walk 5 miles to school?
Exactly. And you had these black female teachers. They were all females. And they understood that your only chance of changing your life was education.
Wow.
And they made sure, especially for the black boys, they knew that they were only going to have you for a few years. And so they made sure that they taught you the basics. Math and English were very important, and to show you examples of other black men who has succeeded. Booker T. Washington, George Washington Carver, Du Bois, Douglas, all of those, so that you knew
that it could be possible.
Precisely.
To me, I think that is so important. Images, visualization, for you to be able to see that it's possible because this person did it, that person did it, this person did it. And that's another thing that we should address, right? In media, as a black media representative, we need to make sure we show positive images of black people.
It's important, because right now, the whites, you said the whites, they got control of what's being put out in the media. They run all the news stations, so they controlling that narrative.
You always say that, yeah. And we talk about this the last episode too, because I feel like everybody that has a social media page is a part of the media and is a part of that imagery. And whatever you choose to put out there, you're promoting it, right?
I agree, but at the same time, it's just that
national on a high scale.
The established news platforms they have a bigger reach than I would. You feel me? So I think it just we got to put out that right image, like you say, and it just takes time. Those companies has been around for 60, 70 years.
Right.
We've been around for 4 years, so it's like a 66-year gap, and it's like, man, we just got to understand that it's just a process.
So, you know what I want to ask you too, because now that we have seen and witnessed a black presidency, tell people how then, in those days when all this stuff was going on and, black men were just expected to work or whatever, once they saw the value and the contribution that black people were making, what was the rhetoric like? You know how now we have Trump and he says all this weird stuff, everyone gets scared. If I were to read a paper from back then or whatever, what was the language like?
Back in
then?
the 50s.
Yeah.
First of all, unless it was a black newspaper,
you
didn't read anything about black people. If you read anything about black people, it was a black person having committed a crime, especially against a white person.
Pushing that
narrative, scaring people, black scary people, black scary people. Okay.
Exactly. And occasionally you see something. One of my brothers was really famous for killing big snakes, so there was a picture of him in the Troy newspaper. This was in Troy, Alabama. Was him with this huge rattlesnake that he killed. So that occasionally there was something like that, but for the most part, in that small town, Troy was just like every place else back in the South in the 50s, where you had to get off the sidewalk when white people were walking on the sidewalk. There were separate entrances for everything. For the black folks, we would come to town on a wagon on Saturday afternoons when my father would get off work, and all the black people would gather down by the train depot where all of these wagons and mules were parked, and all the black people would hang out and go shop at the Western Auto and the 10-cent store and all of those places. But if you were walking on the sidewalk and white people were walking towards you, you got off the sidewalk. So it was, and the theater, of course, was segregated. We had to sit in the balcony. So it was a rough life. But what was really wonderful for me was my parents made what was then a very courageous decision. When I finished the second grade, they decided that they would move to Cincinnati. And my older sister was living in Cincinnati, and she was trying to get all of get my parents and her brothers to move to Cincinnati because there were opportunities there. And, my father had never gone to school, did not know how to read or write. The only person who knew how to read and write in the family before we came along was my mother. And so she did. She was fortunate enough to be able to go to the 6th grade in school. And so that really changed the trajectory of my life and my younger brother and sister's life. It was a very difficult decision for me because I really enjoyed being in the country.
Yeah?
Running through the woods and the pastures and playing with the animals. And I had cousins who lived not far away.
Right, yeah.
They were my best friends.
Yeah.
And it was scary for a little kid from that environment to come to an urban environment where you had crime, you had gangs, you had, really difficult experience.
Yeah, we talked about this on a previous episode, and it's just something that I always want to talk about, and I don't know why, but I need people to understand that the segregation and the oppression in the South was so bad that tens of thousands of families moved, and they call it the Great Migration. Right. If you ever have anything to read about it, it's so crazy because this is what everyone's account of what happened to them was. They were in the South. People, during Reconstruction, we were afforded some property, not much, but in the neighborhoods where black people were thriving, the white people came and destroyed it. You weren't able to go on certain side of towns. The city was still segregated. And anytime white people felt like it, they would just come and do whatever they wanted to do. So people, because the Industrial Revolution was going on in a lot of port cities, New York, LA, Detroit. Cincinnati, Chicago, the cars were being built in Detroit, and, the cargo was being brought in. So a lot of the families said, there's an opportunity to make money, and we're out. So we literally, as a people, voted with our feet and said, we're not taking this anymore. Whatever the laws and the rules that you guys have going on in the South, we're out. And the South was just, the attitudes and those ideas were all frowned upon.
Right.
And a lot of people left.
Yeah, and it was a tough decision, and a lot of people didn't leave. A lot of people stayed. But, you'd have family members who moved, and they would say they moved to Detroit, got a job in one of the auto plants, and they drive back down for the summer, in the summer to visit, in Cadillacs and big Buicks.
That's what my dad did.
Yeah.
We always went down south, and there's a meme that goes around the internet, and it's like, it's Emily being fat and her kids, and they have one first, right? And then they're standing there, and the meme says, when your cousins come down south for the summer. And I'm like, that is so us. Like, my dad had a Cadillac, and he would drive all the way from New Jersey every summer to Washington, Georgia. And everybody would be like, oh, wow.
Right, y'all rich. So it was, everybody thought, okay, that's the thing.
I want to get in on this. Exactly. What's going on up there?
Exactly. And for my older brothers and sisters older brothers really who left the South and came up, that's exactly what they did. I mean, I had my one brother who all he bought were Cadillacs, and convertible Cadillacs.
My mom had convertible Cadillacs. Yes.
And so it was quite an experience. But the other thing, educationally, was that I was going to school for the first time to an integrated school for the 3rd grade, and
were the schools in the North or were they ever segregated?
Well, it was not legal segregation.
Okay.
It was what they called de facto segregation.
In the North.
In the North.
In the South, it was legal.
It was de jure, what they called, the courts called de jure segregation. And that's what Brown versus Board of Education was all about.
Right.
De jure, where the law was, like in Georgia, you don't go to school, black kids and white kids don't go to school together because it's against the law. In the North, they didn't go to school together because they lived separate from each other. We lived in the ghetto. There might have been in Sherman Elementary School that I went to, there were probably 300-400 kids. There might have been 1 or 2 white kids in that school. But all the teachers were white, and there were no black teachers there. And so, some of them were very nice and
right, respectful,
professional. Mm-hmm. They wanted to do their job. Others were openly racist. I mean, it was like they were being punished by being sent to the school to teach these black kids. And so you could tell, even as a 3rd grader, of course, you knew, who didn't like you and didn't care about you, and you knew the ones who did. So I did the 3rd grade in Cincinnati, and then convinced my parents, we'd go back down south for the summer to visit. I convinced my parents to let me stay with my aunt, who lived on the same farm that we had lived on. So I spent the 4th grade down south living with my aunt, going to the school that
because you didn't like the fact that you were, you still kind of had to go through the same thing that you were going through in the South, but yeah.
It was home.
But you still had,
Right, I was comfortable, my friends were there, the whole bit, and I knew the lay of the land. But it was difficult being away from my parents, walking 5 miles to school.
Oh my God.
And as we're walking, the school buses with the white kids would go past us and they'd be yelling, nigger, nigger, nigger.
See, when my dad told me that, it sent me over the edge because I can't. I can't because I hear people say this now, and I say this all the time. Whatever you are doing now is what you would have done then, right?
Yeah.
So if you're the type of passive person that's just like, oh, whatever, I'm not paying attention to what's going on in the news. I don't care about the laws. I don't care. You probably would have been like that then too, because we still face some of those issues. But I don't know what to say. Like, you can't apologize, but it's like, only thing we can do now is do what we can do, honor our ancestors and honor our elders, and try to make things better so that we can't.
I got a question for you. And we talk about this a lot on the show. As far as voting.
Voting?
Yeah. How important do you feel that is, and why do you feel like people in my generation, the younger generation, don't really care about it?
Oh, it's extremely important. And, a lot of people expect change to take place immediately. If I vote this time, then X is going to happen. They're going to do this for us. So, and if they don't do this for us, I'm not going to vote for them again. I'm not going to vote, and that kind of thing. And, you have to be really smart about this and understand that change takes place slowly, and maybe it takes living as long as I have. I'm going to be 75 years old this year. And I have a perspective now that goes from 1944, when I was born during World War II, to the time when I understood what was going on in the 50s, watching the civil rights movement, participating in the black student movement, watching the Black Panthers and just really
Taking it all in. Yeah.
taking it all in and being a part of that, sitting and watching the March on Washington, experiencing the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X and all my heroes, and understanding that, okay, I have to be in this for the long haul. And I have to understand that change takes place in intervals. It takes time for things to really get to where it's supposed to be. And electing a black man president, even though a lot of black people say he didn't do anything for us, that was very, very important. And we've got to, just the idea, the fact that he was elected is extremely important. And this last election, this midterm election, showing the power of the black woman vote is very, very important. And if black men could start, I was going to say something that I shouldn't say.
We say it all on here, Grandpa. Don't feel no kind of way. Just go
They
ahead.
take their head out of their butts and really understand what's going on here, and understand that it's a long-term thing. That we didn't get to where we are overnight.
Yeah.
I mean, there was, you visit the Martin Luther King Jr. Historical site, and the Human Rights Museum, and you see the price that people paid to get us to this point. For me to be able to go from that little school, Union Hill School, in Alabama, to the University of Cincinnati, get 2 degrees at the University of Cincinnati, to get a law degree at a prestigious law school like the University of Michigan. That was unheard of. That just did not happen. But it did, and it does, and it can. Okay? But we have to commit to doing that. We have to understand the price you have to pay to do that. You have to deny yourself some, thing.
Football, maybe, win or something, something. You have to make some sacrifices,
Exactly.
people, and demand your respect.
Exactly.
I say that I try to tell them. I try to tell them every week. I promise. You might have to sacrifice something to gain your dignity.
Exactly. And to provide a future for your kids. I mean, that's the thing for me. The important thing for me was to see my children, one, get an education. Because that's something they can't take from me.
Right.
Okay, they can take everything else. They can't take that. So get an education, okay? And watching my grandson walk across the stage and get his diploma, to watch my son get his degree from Georgia State right here in Atlanta, it was like, okay.
Oh wow, that's great.
Yeah. And that is the key, is to understand that there are opportunities that we do have. They're not what everybody would like, but if we take advantage of the opportunities that we have and work hard. I mean, there's nothing going to be given to you. Understand you're not going to be given anything in this society.
Right.
And that what they may have to, white men in particular, may have to have X level of experience or credentials. Yours has to be twice as much as theirs. That's the reality.
So, speaking of white men and education and all that, recently there was a college scandal. Did you hear about that?
Yes.
Where it was found that there were a few actresses, Felicity Huffman being one, and they were caught because they were paying their children's way into these schools by influencing either the sports center by saying that they were playing a sport, doing well, or their scores or something like that were being skewed. They were pretending that they were passing the entrance exams and they really weren't. So when you say that the white men, you have to have double, but was that all? I mean, are we just chasing a fairy tale with white men? Because a lot of them didn't have all those credentials or do all the studying that they needed to do to reach that level. And I'm sure it didn't start with these people that just got caught.
Right.
So when you first heard about that, what was your response, or how did you react to that when you found out that they were caught? Because we knew, I mean, to me, I didn't know why people were so surprised, but
Right.
because they were caught, I guess, is what the surprise is about. So how did you react to that?
Well, it's like you, it's sort of like, so what? There is legal, quote unquote, bribery going on all the time for university admissions. If you are the child of somebody who gives 100,000, 200,000,
As a just donation.
right,
Uh-huh.
right, then you get an advantage. You get so many points. That child gets so many points above and beyond what everybody else gets to enter into that college or university. Which is why you see so many on so many college campuses, these buildings with somebody's name on
Right.
it.
Yeah, because they gave the most money.
Exactly. Their kid will have a much, much greater opportunity to get into that college than anybody else. Okay? So that kind of stuff has been going on for years. Okay? There's a little bit about, the few people who, it's wrong.
Right.
It's not fair.
Yeah.
It makes it a disadvantage. And yet you have people complaining about affirmative action.
Yeah.
You have people complaining about colleges want to make sure that their student body is diverse. Okay? And yet you have people paying and violating rules to get their kids into schools. And you don't see the uproar from particularly the right about all of that, because they want to preserve the advantage that they have.
For their kids.
Exactly.
And their grandkids.
Exactly.
So I think from that we can learn that, and I say this all the time too, that we as African Americans, young black men in particular, because we take on your last name, right?
Yeah.
And your kids will take on your last name. So I put this on black men in particular to try to preserve their legacy.
Yeah. Be a role model.
Be a role model and establish your legacy and have some pride behind that.
Exactly.
That would take us so much further if every black man today said, you know what, I am so proud of my last name and my family that I want my children and my children's children to have XYZ or to be able to do XYZ. Because my father, Jim Crow South, lived the same life. He was drafted when Vietnam, so he didn't get the opportunity. He was the class president of his high school.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he would have gone to college and pursued something, but he couldn't because he was that number that was taken in the draft. So he had to go to Vietnam and, you know, fight the war and almost die and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But you know, other people and like his brother and his cousins and stuff, they stayed and like you said, they kept farming, established their own business. You know, they were successful in their own right. They trucking companies and, you know, land and all this stuff. So no matter what direction you went, you could have still, you know, preserved your legacy or provided something for your family and left something for them. So tell us what made you decide to get into law after.
Well, it was kind of a fluke, really. You know, when I graduated from high school, I didn't really have the opportunity to go to college. The big colleges and universities, including the University of Cincinnati, which was right across the street from my high school, they didn't really, black students weren't really welcome there. The only schools that I was directed to by my counselor were the black schools, Fisk and Bethune-Cookman and those schools, and I couldn't afford them. I mean, they give you the best scholarship they could give you, but it didn't pay for everything. And so I had to come up with a different plan. And I investigated the military. So I had this opportunity with the Army to go into a field that I thought, okay, if I don't go to college, which was my goal, if I don't go to college, I would at least get some training in something where I could make a living for my family. And that was to be a lab technician, chemical lab technician.
Wow.
And they had a program like that, but you had to pass a test to get into that program.
Of course.
So I took the test, I passed the test, and they said, you're in.
Wow.
And sure enough, when I got out of basic training, they put me on a bus, and of all places, they brought me back to Alabama, Fort McClellan, Alabama,
Oh God.
for my advanced training to be a lab technician. And it was really one of the best things that I could have done, because this was in 1964. You know, being in Alabama, outside of Anniston, Alabama, which is not too far from Birmingham, and being able to visit Birmingham, where I had cousins, and see the church where the little black girls were killed, and just to really immerse myself in the civil rights movement. But as a soldier, you know, you couldn't do very much. But it was really a learning experience. So I finished my training as a lab technician, and I was sent to Fort Detrick, Maryland, which was a highly classified, top secret chemical biological research center. And I was working in a lab, so I didn't have to go fight. What I learned was that all the people, civilians and military, that I was working with were all college graduates who were working in those labs. But for the fact that they'd gone to college for biology or chemistry or whatever, I was just as smart as they were. And they also respected me and encouraged me. And so it was, okay, you know, I I can compete at this level. So I was in the Army from 1963 to 1966. In 1965, they started to send everybody to Vietnam. By the time I was getting out, it was like tons of people going to Vietnam. Here I was getting out. And so I didn't have to go to Vietnam. When I came back to the University of Cincinnati and applied, it was like, come on, please.
Because everyone was gone.
All the white males were going to Vietnam and they didn't have bodies. They needed bodies and money. And Congress had passed the GI Bill, which meant
they'll pay for you.
Yeah. So, and Lyndon Johnson had passed the War on Poverty. So there was all this money that came to the universities with every black student they brought in. So I started out in speech pathology and audiology. I got a bachelor's degree in speech pathology and audiology. But while there, in the 60s, there was the black student movement was very active. And I became active in the Black Student Organization. And I was the spokesperson for the Black Student Organization. So what was happening at all the campuses, black students were making demands on the administration for things like Black Studies Department, recruiting black students, the whole bit. Well, I was one of the leaders for that at the University of Cincinnati. We presented our demands. I was the one that gave the speech to the students all gathered out there. And I said to them at the end, we're going over to the administration building to deliver our demands. You're welcome to come with us. I thought maybe out of the 300 black students, there might be about 50 who would go over with us. And of the white students, I thought, well, maybe 100. I get down off of the podium where I gave the speech, and I start to walk toward the administration building. There were hundreds of students in front of me. I looked behind me, there were hundreds of students behind me, and I said, oh shit.
You done started something.
Exactly.
So were they met, the demands?
Yeah, it took a while. I mean, we met with the president and we told him, call off classes, call a meeting of your cabinet, of faculty to discuss our demands. Not going to do that. We said, okay, we'll call off classes.
See what I'm saying? That's what you have to do sometimes.
Yeah. And so we had people running through the buildings telling faculty members to close their classes and the whole bit. And it was it never happened at the University of Cincinnati before. But the president then decided to meet with us with his cabinet. And he said, tell me, why did this happen? I said, well, if you go over to the library, the school library, there's a case right as you walk in the door, and there's a book open to a page that describes the founding of the University of Cincinnati. And it says that Charles McMicken gave so many acres of land to the city of Cincinnati to establish a university to educate white boys and girls.
What?
And I said, that's what it's doing. It's educating white boys and girls. We're invisible, okay? There's nothing about us here.
Right.
You don't teach any classes.
They were just taking the money the government was giving you to educate for the black
that
kids.
could educate white boys and girls.
But that's the same thing you see in just the whole curriculum in school in general.
Yeah.
It's like even when we go to social studies, we're not
Right.
talking about black history. We talking about the popular stuff, the Harriet Tubmans and all that. But basically, they're pushing their narrative again. And it's like, how do we overcome that problem? What do you do as black people?
What
as
they
black
did.
Parents? No, I'm saying like as black parents. Like say when I had kids and started raising my kids, me putting them in school is not going. A lot of people talk about the education system being broken. But at the end of the day, even if you do send them, they're gonna teach them that white agenda.
So do you think
you gotta
that?
know,
Yeah.
you gotta know what they're teaching your kid.
And
Okay.
a question too, like black parents, like you don't know what you don't know. So how can I teach my kid something that I know?
Did you know any of this stuff a lot of the stuff that we're talking about personally about your grandfather?
I knew about the University of Cincinnati thing.
Okay.
But like a lot of the growing up and
But that's where I think too, for as far as their generation, for whatever reason, and I'm just gonna blame it on the trauma of the whole experience, they don't really talk about it much.
Right.
But I think that because of that, we missed it. We don't appreciate it, and we don't carry on that knowledge. Like, I'm not gonna, mess up and do stupid stuff, because then all of what my parents went through, my grandparents went through, would be in vain.
And I think, and that kind of goes back to my question about voting, about the younger generation really not caring, because
we don't know the struggle.
We don't know the struggle. I mean, we know it, we hear about it, but it's like, okay, we're not experiencing.
We don't
that.
think it's like our parents did.
I wouldn't even say that. It's just that I guess it's not really an emphasis on it in families or just really knowing the history. Like if you don't know the history, it's like, oh, okay. Just like I'll take an example. When you watch the news every day, you see somebody die every day, and it's like, oh, okay. But when it's somebody close to you and you got a connection to them, it's like you really feel that. And now you want to, just like with Jamari, his mom came on, and she said she was seeing the deaths, and now it got close to her, and she wanted to take action now. And it's like, man, once we start having the conversations about this is why you should vote, this is what I went through. If I'm hearing it from somebody like you, somebody I look up to, somebody I see on a regular basis, it's like I'm willing to take heed, like I gotta do something about that. And I think that's the problem that we're going through as black people.
I never understood why people don't, just for the fact that they work so hard to get us not to vote, understand that the power of our vote. And then also when I learned about what they put black people through when we were given the right to vote, like the tests.
Right. Poll taxes, all the stuff that people had to go through to vote, especially in the South. We should treat it with at least a lot of respect, if for no other reason than the fact that so many people died in order for us to be able to vote.
When Voting Rights Act was passed, black women used to get dressed to the hilts to go vote. Mm-hmm. I mean, like, it was a big old thing. They used to it was like they put on their Sunday best to go vote. And the fact that so many of us that grew up in the North, and I call myself first generation North, only because the Confederacy would be considered a different country, right? Mm-hmm. So I consider myself first generation because I was the first person in my family born north of the Mason-Dixon line, right? So I say that all the time. For us to have moved back south and not be more instrumental in the political arena, to me, it just baffles my mind that so many family went through so much to get them out of the South. For us to move back and neglect it and not get more involved in politics here and change the dynamics of.
I think that goes back to what you're saying about, just not having those conversations because of the PTSD of the whole, not
right.
Just want to just overlook, because black people, we kind of, I know me personally, like sometimes we just kind of like deal with our problems ourselves and just move forward without talking about it, especially men,
and not passing it over to your kids.
Yeah, I mean, I think.
I don't know. Do you think that there's some shame attached to the fact that?
I don't know. I've never picked up on that. I just think it's, people just take
We moved
things for
on.
granted
Yeah.
and then just figure, hey, I got more important things to worry about,
Yeah.
than that. And so it's not a top of mind thing
Right.
for most people.
I think that my father kind of figured, I'll send her down there and she'll see what it's
But
like.
I don't think directly it's a top of. I mean, yeah, indirectly it is a top of mind because we're always complaining about what these other races are doing, and these are the things that gets what we're complaining about, taken care of. So I wouldn't say it's not a top of mind. I just think indirectly is.
Have you ever been to Alabama, where your family is from?
I think I might have went to Troy when I was younger. We just had a family reunion. I didn't go, but I think I went when I was younger.
Yeah,
I think I was a little kid.
his parents. I took his father and his aunt to Alabama when they were young, but I haven't really taken many of the grandchildren. We still have family reunions.
There.
And every other one is in Alabama. And so when it was in Los Angeles,
Everybody wanted to know.
Yeah.
I know
And I actually have a grandma that lives in Mobile, and my whole life I've never been to Mobile.
you need to go.
I know, and it's only 3 or 4 hours from here, so I just need to make that jump.
Yeah, I go to where my family is from all the time. It makes me mad as hell because a lot of those plantation homes are still there. The slave quarters are still there. My father's house that he grew up in is a museum now.
oh wow,
So, it kind of makes him upset because they tell a lie story about what went on in that house. So he barged in there one day and told the true story to the people that were visiting the museum. But, just because that he's like that, I'm not going to say I'm very militant, but I'm just like, look, I will not, Jabari clowns on me all the time. He's like, you will protest anything. You're always cutting off something. You're always ready to protest. But I am, because I'm like, yo, I don't need any of this. We, at one point, we're not even allowed, or they didn't even want us involved in a lot of the stuff that we're involved in now. So I'm willing to cut off my cable, not watch football, not mention it, not talk to this person, ignore this. I'm willing to do any of that because at one point we weren't even invited in.
yeah. Well, it's a different environment now. I mean, in the past, because most of us were all treated the same.
Right.
Okay.
Regardless.
Right. Now, we've got folks who have done very well and do very well, and you see them on TV, so you learn about them. So not everybody, but people want they aspire to do those things, and the social issues are not as significant.
Right.
They don't stand out as much. Back when I was growing up, the disparity was so obvious. Now it's a little more subtle, and that's why when I was in college, I came to realize that the key was to get black kids to value education and get them prepared to go to college. And so I started a summer program when I was right after my experience with the university. The university recognized that I had some leadership abilities. And so, of course, they, those people are smart.
Yeah.
They see somebody who they said, okay, this kid's got something, and he can be helpful to us. And so it was like, here, we'd like you to do this, and this, You need money for that? Fine, we'll help you out, you know. So I started a program for kids who were sophomores and juniors in high school, and brought them up to the university so they could see what it was like to be at a university. I convinced faculty and students at the university to help tutor these kids in math and English.
Those are the two. You said that before. So you think that math and English are the two main components?
They're
to
fundamental.
succeed? Yeah.
They're fundamental. If you don't know how to read, if you don't know math, then you're not going to get very far.
So nowadays, people kind of take the English language for granted, I would say. I mean, you know, we come up with our own lingos and stuff like that. But it's really not going to get you that far when you start looking for a job. You know,
Exactly.
people aren't going to appreciate that.
It's
So
not
I
the
think-
language the business world communicates in.
Right.
You know, the languages that we.
I see that a lot too. And we've talked about this on the last episode about the difference in what white schools get. I think it was like $23 billion toward funding their education in just public schools. We're not even talking higher education. Just public school systems. They have a gap of $23 million or $1 billion between what white schools get and what black schools get. And I think it's by design, right? Because you live in a more affluent neighborhood,
Right.
you pay higher taxes, your
Right.
kids get better books and better education.
Exactly.
So they're still doing that. So we were talking about that, and we were saying how important it is to educate your children at home.
Yeah, and you know, I've spent a lot of my years dealing with education and the education system. When I graduated from law school, you want us to stop? When I graduated from law school, my first job was representing school teachers, public school teachers, the teachers union in Michigan. So I worked first for a law firm that represented them. Then I went to work for the teachers union itself, because they paid a lot more. And I had a great expense account and a car.
Right.
You know,
Oh, wow.
it was really something. But I learned a lot about how the education system really
Works.
operates. And who wins in the education system. Whenever there was a funding increase, and we would negotiate a contract for the teachers, most of the money that came, we took and gave to the teachers, okay? And it didn't matter how good the teacher was. All the teachers got the same raise, okay? So if you were the best teacher, you got, $10,000. If you were the worst teacher, you got $10,000.
Oh, wow.
Nobody really cared about that. And one of the things I came to realize was that, especially as women were able to move into the main labor force, because before you had a lot of really smart women whose only professional job they could really get was teaching.
Right.
And so there was no competition for them. Once women started pushing for more representation in engineering, law, medicine, all those things, all those bright teachers people who used to become teachers, now weren't teachers anymore. And so you had a lot of people come into teaching who weren't particularly bright folks.
Wow.
And the males especially, because, they be in college and and they couldn't get into engineering, they couldn't get into
Right,
law,
so
they
that
couldn't
was
get
the
into
next
medicine. And they said, what can I do where I can make some money? Teaching. The colleges of education takes anybody. If you can read, you can get into a
Wow.
college of education. Colleges of education are cash cows
Wow.
for the universities.
Wow.
They use that money to fund the business school, the medical schools,
Wow.
and so it's one of the big issues that we don't talk about is the quality of people who go into teaching, go into education. That's a huge part of the problem.
Yeah, I think
and it's not just white people, by the way.
Right. I think we learned that on the back end when our student is in class and the teacher, we realize, the mentality or the level of the person that we're dealing with.
Exactly.
The only requirement to become a teacher is to have a degree, right?
Yeah.
Well,
and then you have to get your.
They do have a test.
Yeah.
And they have to get certified.
After.
But the people who control, one of the things I learned in Michigan, I was appointed to a position with the state, and then the commission that I was appointed to kind of decided what the qualifications were for the certification. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I learned real quick was the people who really were in charge of that committee, that commission, were the colleges of education.
Oh, gosh.
And the only thing they cared about was getting all of their kids certified.
Right.
Because that counted for them being a school that people wanted to go to.
Oh, my gosh.
So it was never about the kids.
Right, basically.
And that is the big problem with education and education policy making today.
Right.
And it's the
You
big
have to make sure
problem
it's
with
about
the
the kids.
traditional public schools. The traditional public schools, the school districts, it's not about the kids. It's about the adults in the system.
So you think the parents should make more noise so that it could be more...
Parents need to make more noise, and I think we need to consider alternative to the traditional public school.
Do you like charter schools?
Yeah, I think if charter schools are done the way they should be done,
Right.
held to high standards, and not be a place where folks can come in and make a lot of money,
Right.
which is what is happening in a lot of states. It's happening in my state of Michigan. That was not
Louisiana,
the
New
original
Jersey.
idea. There was a guy named Kenneth Clark, Dr. Kenneth Clark, who was a black psychologist whose testimony, he and his wife Mamie were black psychologists, and they did some studies back in the 50s on the effect of racism on black kids, and what they looked at was the effect of separate schools on black kids. And their testimony was the basis for the Supreme Court deciding Brown versus Board of Education,
Right.
and desegregating the schools.
Oh, wow.
But then in 1964, Kenneth Clark wrote an article that said, this thing quite turned out the way we had hoped, while the kids did get into these school districts, the school districts were not prepared to educate these kids. And it wasn't about educating the kids. And he said, I had a quote, American public schools suffer from, quote, pervasive and persistent inefficiency, particularly in the schools provided for Negro and other underprivileged children. the paper he concluded with a discussion of alternative to existing urban public school systems, including such possibilities as industrial demonstration schools and schools operated by the Department of Defense. What he argued for was that the Links, the Deltas, the Kappas, and all of these black organizations should start schools and educate our kids.
And in today's world, I guess those would be like, what do you call it, schools?
HBCUs.
No, the schools where they teach you how to do stuff, like trade school.
Yeah, trade schools, we should have trade schools, but what if you look at today's charter schools, I was involved in the development of the charter school law in Michigan.
Right.
Okay? And the way that law was sold was that, you'd have nonprofit groups who could start a charter school. Okay? You can have a group of teachers get together, start a charter school. Okay? The NAACP could start a charter school. Okay? And so that's the case today. There's no reason why the Kappas, the Alphas,
Right. Why don't they start a school? I never even thought of that.
Exactly.
That's a good idea because now the corporations are funding these charter schools,
Precisely.
and then they point your kids in the direction that they want them to go in.
Exactly.
But yeah, no, we should push for that. We should talk about that
Exactly.
more.
Or there are companies, a group that I used to work for. It started out as a nonprofit education reform group and became a charter school management company.
Oh, great.
But they didn't care about the quality
The
of
curriculum,
the schools. They all they wanted to do was make money. So the guy who became the president is now a millionaire. Okay? Because he made all this money off of all these kids. And when I met with this group, and I said to them, look at your results. Your kids aren't performing any better than traditional public schools.
Wow.
So why should they go to your school? And they said, well, it's not us, it's the kids. I said, that's the same argument that traditional public schools are making. That means you're no better than they are. And I said, I don't accept that it's the kids. I said, why don't we look at the adults in the system?
Right.
And see what's going on there. And the kids in those schools will tell you, these teachers don't care about us.
That's
they
horrible.
don't care if we learn.
Oh.
And that's what we have to fix. But there are some schools. There are some schools in Atlanta called the KIPP school.
Oh yeah, they have those in Texas too.
Yeah, the KIPP schools.
In New Jersey too.
Those are schools where
Right.
the kids, it's about the kids. And it's about making sure that the people who come in to teach in those schools are prepared
For the
children. You're coming here because you recognize where these kids are. And you understand that your job is to take them from where they are to where they ought to be.
Wow.
Where they're competing with kids in the suburbs.
So if your kid goes to a KIPP school, they're going to a good school. That's our takeaway from this interview because we're going to have to wrap up. Make sure that your homework is to find an elder in your family and talk to them and get some of their insight and their knowledge and their experiences. And one question before we go, there's a question that's been going on around this presidential debates, and all the candidates have been asked this question. So I'm going to ask you.
Okay.
Do you think that descendants of slaves should be given reparations?
Well, it depends on when you say reparation, what
Financial
you're talking about.
or land, which will never happen, but financial. also.
Right. I don't think that's feasible.
Yeah.
I think what we ought to do is figure out ways to make up the deficit.
It could be education,
It
grants.
education is probably the most important thing. If I had my brothers, every kid that graduated from high school who could read at a 12th grade level would get a scholarship to a college of their choice.
Okay, well that kind of goes in line with what some of them are saying, that
Yeah.
they want free college for
Yeah,
students.
yeah, and to me, that it's about opportunity,
Right.
because what we were deprived of was opportunity.
Exactly.
And so, if we want to make up for that, then we provide opportunity for kids today. Opportunities like KIPP. Okay, make sure that the schools like KIPP are supported, and that the idea, the model that they present is a model that is replicated in other communities. We don't have KIPP schools in Michigan.
Oh wow.
We need KIPP schools in Michigan. They can't be everywhere, but there are folks who should be starting KIPP schools in Michigan.
Well, look into that too. That's another thing that you can do. Look into KIPP schools. I didn't really know much about KIPP schools, but that's good to know. So KIPP schools are a good thing. So we're gonna wrap up this episode, and I know that you're gonna watch it and learn so much. So we look forward to that. And give us your feedback. Make sure you follow us on Instagram @CTD_ATL. Make sure you follow Innovative Black Station on all social media networks, and check out our next episode, which will air on Tuesday. So we are gonna thank our guests for coming. And whenever you're in Atlanta, make sure you stop by.
Absolutely.
And make sure if you learn anything or if you see anything in the news that you think that we should talk about, just let us know.
Okay.
And we will also, you could be our elder council. I think everyone should have elder council. Everyone respect their elders, and make sure, like you said, your homework is to talk to an elder in your family and get some of their insight and their wisdom and their knowledge. So we will see you next week. Peace.
God bless.